So it's being in a position that you can transform people's lives. So that's why I think about wealth versus, okay, I can go to nice restaurants, I can live in a nice building, but that's just being rich. I'm talking about how can we build something that's going to transform our lives.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Casman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. If you are enjoying this show, you already know what I'm going to ask. I need a little favor. Leave us that rating and review. We want to get that honest feedback so we can know what works for your investing goals, but also get some other tips and insights to bring that same value to other investors. And if you haven't done so, please make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Now, we got a great show today. We're going to be talking to Kayr. They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to KAYJAYConsulting.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to KAYJAYConsulting.com and click on the Mastermind button today. Now, Kayr is the co-founder of KAYJAY Consulting. Now, they are a stellar example of a young professional who has benefited from working on Wall Street and building a multi-million-dollar real estate investment company, currently with over 150 real estate units from scratch. For as long as he can remember, Kayr was a Philadelphia native. He wanted to go to college, but being the first to go amongst his parents, siblings, and friends meant that he had many obstacles to overcome. So we're going to talk to Kayr about overcoming those obstacles, his time on Wall Street, and much more. Let's welcome to the show, Kayr.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for allowing me to share my story and perspective on the real estate industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kayr, I went over your bio at a very high level. Why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of those gaps?
Perfect. So I grew up in Philadelphia with 6 siblings in a single parent household. My mother raised us. We moved place to place. At one point, our house caught on fire. And I remember at a young age saying, man, I never want to be in this predicament of having food insecurity, having housing insecurity. And so I started to set out my life to change it so that I could become a better person, be independent versus moving around. I said I didn't want to become the school teacher or become like the janitor or the bus driver. I wanted to be the landlord. So I knew that I wanted to go into finance first and then go buy real estate. So I went to college and interned on Wall Street, worked there. And while I was on Wall Street, I started buying real estate. I bought my first rental in 2009. By 2018, I had 9 rentals. 2019, I had 35 rentals. By 2020, I had 105. So I bought 70 rentals during the pandemic. Now I'm at 151 plus rental units in the Philadelphia, Harrisburg area. So it's been quite a run. And that's a quick rundown of my experience.
I love it, man. I love it. You talked about that background, coming from a single parent household, having 6 siblings, recognizing that you talked about food insecurities, housing insecurities, and knowing that you wanted something different, going to college, getting a job on Wall Street and starting to invest in real estate, growing the portfolio that you have today. Talk to me about kind of that moment when you realized you wanted to go into finance, you wanted to get on Wall Street. I mean, why that? You mentioned not going in and being a teacher or being something else. Like, why was that career path so enticing for you?
And so when I was in like 7th grade, my stepdad came back into my life because my mother was married, then got divorced, and then she had said that he needed to be back in our life because we were like teenage boys, my brother and I, and the other siblings. So I remember living in a studio apartment at 5th and C2B Moore, where we had a hot plate, no stove. We had a bathroom sheet as the door, but we didn't have a door. We had a tub and not a shower. And we had rats and mice and roaches living amongst us in the studio apartment with like 14, 15 people. And I remember talking to my stepdad, Charles Washington, and he said, don't be an F up like me and a lot of your siblings, because I had siblings who got pregnant at young teenage years. And then I had siblings who actually was having run-ins with the law. So I just took those words. The first time an adult told me not to be an F up like him. So he said, do as I say, don't do as I do. So he was very gifted, but he could never keep a stable job. He was fighting all these demons all over the place. And a lot of my siblings were struggling. That's why we were all living that way in those conditions. And I was like 13 at the time. And I said, man, I probably should try to do something different because I was starting to go down the bad route, running the streets, smoking weed, drinking, doing all this crazy stuff in middle school. And so at that moment, I said, you know what? I do want to have a better life. I'm just going to try and see if I can change my life from being like a C student because I was cute, and then try to see if I can do better in high school. And so then I started doing better in high school. And I went from being a C student in middle school to valedictorian, president of my school and of my class, captain of the track team, the debate team, played football, all this stuff in high school. So I turned my life around, did a 180, and I got a full scholarship. And so I think seeing that stuff up close and then having that adult figure telling me not to be an F up like him and many others made me start to say, I got to change my life. And so I realized, I started looking around and I said, what can really, really change the way I think about business and think about the world? And I said, if I become like a janitor, that's probably not going to give me enough financial freedom. And then my stepdad used to take walks with me in North Philly and say, these neighborhoods are going to change. They're close to transportation. These buildings that are abandoned, people are going to come and buy this stuff. This stuff is going to get gentrified. He didn't really know exactly when it was going to happen, but he had faith that the neighborhood had a lot of promise. He said, this is a big city. And I remember talking to him. He said, this is just going to happen just like it did in New York. And so, because in the 1970s, New York was really dilapidated and properties were really cheap. And then in the 90s, things just took off in New York and property values just went really, really high. And so I said, when I get older, I'm going to buy some real estate. So I started thinking like a real estate person at a young age because my stepfather planted those seeds, but I also got to see the struggle around me and I wanted better.
Man, that's incredible. I mean, you talked about the struggles you had really as a, young teen, right? Going into, that transition period where boys, growing to men and going down the wrong path, and that conversation with your stepfather really, push you down a different path. And it's interesting because, I'm sure many kids, have those same kind of conversations, right? Where someone tells them, hey, you don't want to make this mistake or do right and make good decisions. But something really, registered with you, and it resonated to the point where you took that, to the point where by the time you got to high school, your grades were improved, you were getting great grades, you were getting, you were captain of debate teams, captain of sports teams, and you
Yeah.
became kind of a leader. And you talked about real estate was really that seed being planted from walking the neighborhoods with your stepfather. Let's talk about, that vision and dream. And before we go deeper, because I just think this is so interesting. Um, you're one of six siblings. Are you where do you fall? Where do you fall in
So
that?
I have six siblings, and so it's a total of us. It will be considered eight of us
Okay.
because so I have four brothers and three sisters. But one brother we have the same dad, but we don't have the same mom. And then I have three younger siblings. We have the same mom, but we don't have the same dad. Then I have three older siblings. I have three older siblings. We have the same dad and we have the same mom. So that's
Got
making
it.
it complicated.
Okay. Okay. So out of that, are you like in the middle
I'm the middle
somewhere?
child. I'm the
You're
middle
the middle
child.
child.
Yes. I'm the middle
Okay.
child. So I got to see what the older ones were doing, and then I
Yeah.
got to see the younger ones. And so I said the older ones were struggling. Like two of my older sisters had got pregnant at teenagers, like 15, 16, and what have you. And then I noticed that pattern. I was like, that's kind of tough. And then I noticed that the younger ones needed someone to look up to. So I said, maybe if I can get my life together, I can probably help somebody else. But I got to first save myself.
No, I think that's powerful, man. Just that awareness you had as a young person to see the pathway those older siblings took, realizing you wanted more for yourself, and also recognizing that you were a role model for your younger siblings and wanting to do right for them, man. That's amazing to hear. Let's fast forward, right? So you get into, college, you go down finance. First of all, what was Wall Street like for you? Talk about your experience there.
So I was very strategic about Wall Street. I knew early on that I wanted to break into Wall Street, and it's very competitive. So what I did is I interned on Wall Street every summer. Freshman year, I did American Express. Sophomore year, I did Prudential Securities, Sales and Trading on the Mercantile Exchange. And junior year, I did investment banking in the technology group at Credit Suisse. And then I took a full-time job at Goldman Sachs doing investment banking after college. So I already knew that every summer I wanted to explore the financial food chain. And then during the school year, I wanted to hone my writing skills, communication skills, analytical skills. So I wanted to marry those two to put me in a position to be hired from one of the best firms in the world. So I knew it was going to be a pressure cooker. So when I got to Wall Street, it was so intense. Before I even got there, Goldman Sachs made us do like 50 hours plus of training, them with online economics, accounting, all that stuff. And then also we had to take the Series 7 exam to become a licensed stockbroker. Then I also had to go through 6 weeks of training at Goldman in New York, which was very intense. And so that experience really helped me understand how best practices and also how you got to have systems and processes in place in order to be successful and do things at a very high level where you're meeting high expectations. And so that training really helped position me for the future because I was super young. I didn't really know my butt from my nose. It was just all over the place where you have to like learn how to be a professional. And so it was like an apprenticeship. So I would spend time studying how these people worked and how these people thought about business.
Oh man, I love that. You talked about, the internships each summer, doing those. Once you finished that, you got the opportunity with Goldman Sachs, how intense that was, 50 hours of training, going out for 6 weeks, putting in all this work to really grow and scale. What was the biggest surprise for you, on that journey?
The biggest surprise was that I had no idea how intense. You hear stories of like, oh, you work at Goldman Sachs investment banking, you're probably gonna work 90 hours. I think the most intense thing was that it felt like you were in like the Marines or something, very intense physically, not just mentally. So it was one point where I worked 50 hours nonstop. And I had to tell my boss, that. So I said it was so intense. I did not expect it to be so physically intense. I knew it was going to be mentally intense. And at that point where they asked me to work 50 hours, I actually had said, I got to go home. I went home on that Friday at 8, 9 p.m. And I woke up on Saturday at 10 p.m. to go to the bathroom and then go back to sleep and woke up on Sunday. So it was very intense across the board.
Wow, man, that's incredible. And wow, I don't think people have that sense of what it's like. I mean, we hear these stories of, working 90 hours and all that, but, you're talking about working 50 hours straight and then sleeping almost for 2 days straight after that to recover.
Yes.
Definitely
Very scary.
physically demanding. I want to talk more about that transition, right? So you're making money on Wall Street, you're doing fine, you're doing great. I imagine the younger version of you would be proud of what you were building, yet you realized that you wanted to start investing in real estate, kind of going back to that initial conversation with your stepfather. What was that first step in the journey to become a real estate investor? And what was your goal with investing in real estate as opposed to just staying in your W-2?
So from those conversations, I always knew that I wanted to do real estate because my stepfather would fix houses. He was like a contractor. He'll do your kitchen, your bathroom. We actually bought a dollar house, and that's how our house had caught on fire because it was a booby trap, and we had gasoline heaters back in the day, and those things are so darn dangerous. And so it was already in my mind. I kept thinking, how am I going to get that real estate? How am I going to get that down payment? So I said, I got to establish my credit. I got to have a little bit of money to start buying properties. And so that was the mindset early on. And I said, how am I going to approach it? Because I worked for the hedge fund and I covered US home builders, UK home builders, US financials, and European financials. And we made a lot of money at the hedge fund buying as investors, shorting and going long stocks. And so I said, maybe I could do this on my own one day and just have my own little portfolio and buy some real estate. So I said, I'm going to set out to understand everything about this industry, listening to conference calls and following Toll Brothers and all those guys. And I said, should I start an LLC or should I put it in my personal name? So through my research, I decided that it was best to put the first 9 properties in my personal name to take advantage of all the benefits that you do not get if you put it in the LLC. And so I said, all right, we're going to start with single families. Then we can buy some multi-families. Then we're going to buy some apartment buildings. But I knew that I need to have the 3 R's, which was I have to build a track record. Then I have to build relationships. And then I'll be able to have a reputation which will precede me. And so I first also focused on the 3 C's, which was intellectual capital, social capital, and financial capital. So I said, all right, let me see. I want to get as smart as I can in the classroom, outside the classroom about this, how capital work in the world, especially in real estate. I want to build relationships. And then also I want to understand, how do you get access to this capital and how do you accumulate it and build wealth, not just become rich, but understand the power of leverage and the power of relationships and the power of capital. America is a capitalist society. So I said, let me master capital.
You mentioned, wanting to build those three R's, which was building a track record, building relationships and your reputation. And then you talked about the three C's for capital. You said intellectual capital, social capital. What was that third one?
Financial capital.
Financial capital. And then you were starting to talk about, how to, the difference between, getting rich and building wealth. Elaborate a little bit more on that notion.
And so what some people would, they're content. They'll get a job making 80,000 a year, 100,000 a year, and they can pay their bills. But in 50 years from now, 30 years from now, are they actually wealthy? So you had a good life, you had a good run, but you only own your own house, or you only have like your small dental practice. Nothing wrong with that. But if you want to build what I call transformational wealth, it's going to take a lot more than that. See, generational wealth, I think of as a north to south concept, where I buy a house and 30 years from now, my child can take it or something like that. Instead, I say we should think about transformational wealth. This is like a left to right type of concept where I can go out and become successful. I start an LLC. I'm in real estate. I convinced my brother to get his real estate license. Therefore, he can get the commission. When I do $1 million deal, he can get the 3% commission. Then also what happened is I can start an LLC, and other family members, I can give them they can become members of my LLC. I give them equity. And so now they're building their wealth today. Like my brother, he does property management. He was able to gift his in-laws, his mother and father-in-law, money so they can buy a duplex. So they're no longer renting. Now they have a house. So it's transforming people's wealth, whether it's a family member or a friend. My business partner, Jody, he had 0 units in 2018. Now he's over 90 units. He's a multimillionaire. So it's being in a position that you can transform people's lives. So that's why I think about wealth versus, okay, I can go to nice restaurants, I can live in a nice building, but that's just being rich. I'm talking about how can we build something that's going to transform our lives?
What I like about what you talked about there when you talk about transformational wealth is there's really, three ways of looking at it. I think sometimes people look at it on the very high end, which is like, the family names we always hear about, right? The multi-billion dollar families. And that is probably not realistic for most people. But then what you're talking about is really being able to transform someone's life. And if you are investing, it's not to say that you're going to make this person a multi-billionaire, even a multi-millionaire, but you can create opportunities to impact this person's life where they can invest, they can make money, they can maybe even just
Yes.
have a job. You're employing people.
Yes.
And that is very powerful and empowering when you think about transformational wealth from that viewpoint. So it's not necessarily this accumulation of massive assets, which helps, but
Yeah.
it's not necessarily that. It's how can we impact other people through the work that we're doing. And I think that goes back to the capital, right? You talked about social capital and not
Yes.
just financial capital, but the social capital and that impact you're having on other people. So I really love when you talked about it from that standpoint. Many of our listeners, are, folks who believe in real estate investing and they look at the alternatives as the stock market. As a guy who, cut your teeth on Wall Street, in the stock market, also as a real estate investor, compare kind of those two investing asset classes and strategies from your perspective.
Well, I would say when you real estate is something that is pretty much long term. If you're flipping properties, you are not a real estate investor. If you are an Airbnb host or person, you are not a real estate investor. Those are just two different vehicles for income, in my opinion. Now, if you are a real estate investor, you're long term investing. So you're buying property and holding it. You're doing buy and hold, or you're buying REITs. I would say if you're so it's basically it's an illiquid asset. So you cannot just sell it immediately. So one thing is that, but with real estate, if you're a buy and hold guy, you can make money off of basically 4 ways. One, you're going to get the tax benefits, depreciation, the write-offs. The other way is cash flows. You're going to get cash flows. That's basically after you pay your mortgage and after you pay your expenses. then you're also going to be able to benefit from appreciation, which is forced and natural appreciation. Natural appreciation is just what the market forces if you make repairs. So you're going to benefit those ways where you have the cash flows, you have the tax benefits. You also going to have the debt pay down. So as you're paying down the debt, you're actually going to be building equity. So those four ways are going to benefit long-term investors in real estate. But you can't sell the asset that fast, and the asset pretty much sits there. And you actually could benefit long-term from it. So it's definitely a way to make a lot of money. The other thing is that when you're in the stock market is very liquid. So therefore, you can be in and out of stocks very fast. And you pretty much is very passive. So if you're going to be investing in the stock market, you're outsourcing the management of the property completely, 100% of the asset, 100%. Even though you could do self-managed with real estate, but real estate is more hands-on if you're going to go the route. If you go in the route that you're going to buy the individual property. When I think about the stock market, I put REITs in there too, because you're outsourcing. You're just getting exposure to real estate, but you're not the guy doing it every single day. So that's how I separate the two worlds. I think they're both very powerful worlds, and I encourage people to invest in both.
I like that. I love the perspective, right? You talked about really two major differential factors, right? One is the length of the investment. So real estate's longer term. Yes, you can flip and do other things, but that's not really a real estate investor in your eyes. So when we talk about investing in real estate, we're talking more about buy and hold, longer term strategies that give you multiple ways to make money, pull out capital, refinance, things like that. Then you're also talking about the actual work of management, right? If you are outsourcing that work, if you're taking it on yourself, if you're working with a property management company, but if you're involved, if you're overseeing that, that's more the real estate space. If you're outsourcing that and you're really hands off and you're just, picking a stock or picking this or picking that,
Yeah,
that's really
yeah.
more of a passive investment. So lots of different ways to make money, and you can certainly mix match strategies there. But, if you are someone who is coming into this with a stock background, or, you're not really familiar with real estate, I think these are some good ways to wrap your head around it. Were there any either challenges or, obstacles you faced since you had that, stock Wall Street background when you were getting into real estate that you kind of had to overcome, or was it pretty fluid from the jump?
I think what the problem is, and I think for everybody, is when you first start, and especially back then, we didn't have social media teaching us everything. Facebook just came out, or what have you. So you had to learn everything on your own, getting access to that information. That's the most challenging thing, is trying to pay attention to what's really important. So you're like, should I read this book? Should I do that book? Back then in 2009 or 2007, 2008, there weren't that many platforms that can teach you. So you had to be self-taught. So you got to go to the library, you got to go talk to the bank, the bank professionals, and try to decide, are they trying to get over you, or are they teaching the right thing? Talk to all these real estate agents. Who has your best interest in mind? It was difficult to navigate. So we all make mistakes that way. So I was very slow and methodical. That's why I decided to buy 9 rentals over a 9-year period, because I said, if I'm a security guard and I have to pay attention to 15 different computers, a thief will get by me. But if I only have to focus on that one security camera, I'm going to catch every single thing. So I said, if I can just do one thing and do it extraordinarily well, focus on this one rental property, understand the whole process, read the settlement sheet, talk to the loan officer, get the ID of the contractor, get the card tags of the contractor, check every single thing. I never got ripped off. Nobody ever robbed me. I don't have those sad stories. I almost went bankrupt. No, because I took my time. Things done well are done soon enough. Success does not like speed. So what I did is I said, let me focus and become really good at this. And so that's how I was able to avoid big mistakes, because I had enough hours and experience understand how to do the very, very basics, the fundamentals. And I think that's a lot of people's issue, is that they're in a rush, but it's unrealistic to get to the big game. If you didn't grow up with wealth and your parents didn't just drop a big bucket of money, you have to take your time to master this game. Or are you going to get burnt?
I go back to your story about being on Wall Street, right? And your time with Goldman Sachs and the 50 hours of training, the 6 weeks, and all the time you put in there. And it sounds like you took a lot of those lessons, at least on the research and the training side, when you went into real estate, and that kind of allowed you to move slower as far as the output and production, but you were working, you were learning, you were educating yourself, you were reading,
Yes.
you were preparing yourself, right? So it took a little longer for you to actually grow the portfolio, but it also allowed you to avoid a lot of the common mistakes other investors make. I know you help other people now, right? So you've got KJ Consulting, and people can learn more at kjconsulting.net. And we'll put a link to that in our show notes. Talk to us a little bit more about some of the investors and the folks that you help.
And so after doing this is like my 15th year. In 2020, my business partner, Jody, who actually was one of my private students, had said, we should probably start KJ Consulting because you're teaching me and a bunch of other people one-on-one. Why don't you just create a platform? We can educate the masses. And I said, I never thought about that. Maybe I should do that. That'll be fun. Let's do it together. And so I pretty much teach people the framework that I use, which is to analyze the macro market first and analyze the individual deals. And then I teach you how to put together a team. I teach you all the key terms, the bird strategy, what's the HELOC. Also teach you about how to assess situations, whether it makes sense for us to take option A, B, or C. And what I mean by that is you may say, I need to get creative financing. Do we do it on the personal side or do we do it on the business side? Line of credit, credit cards, what are the pros and the cons? How do we go from owning 1 unit to owning 100 units in a bunch of years? So what we do is we teach you how to think like a business person. And I'm a firm believer that if you want to be a great athlete, join a great team because you probably know how to run, you probably know how to throw, you probably know how to catch. My job as your coach is to teach you how to be a better runner, a better thrower, and a better catcher. And so our philosophy is, hey, you don't have to spend $1,000 in order to make $1,000. You don't have to spend $1,000 on a real estate education to make $1,000 from real estate. What you have to do is put yourself in a position to win. And so we help the students stack their odds in winning. And that's why we say you should follow KJ Consultant IG page and also check out our website because we're providing with concrete ways to be successful.
Yeah, we'll definitely make sure we link to those in the show notes. I love that, the energy and what you talk about as far as being able to help people and coaching. It's so important, and I keep going back to, earlier in your story when you talked about being kind of that early teen and, being faced with, the life you were living and getting on the right course there. And I'm thinking about both adults and young people, people who maybe aren't where they want to be today and want a better future for themselves. Like if you can go back and you can think about either the inspiration or the one thing that you did that maybe others in your circle didn't do, what would that be? Or what would you tell somebody who wants to live a better life, but maybe they're having a hard time committing to that path?
I would say 2 things. One, in order to do something that you have never done before, you have to become someone that you've never been. So in order to do something that you've never done before, you have to be willing to become someone that you've never been. The second thing is be willing to accept advice from imperfect people. So like my stepfather struggled and a lot of my family members could not relate to him because they said, how you going to tell somebody how to be successful when you're not successful? And he would say, do as I say, don't do as I do. So I was able to look beyond someone's flaws to take the part that is beneficial, that will be good, and grow from there. Because we all fall short, but be willing to take advice from people, even if they're not the best at what they're doing right now. They may have a gym that can help you.
Yeah, I love that. And I would say too, and we're just chatting at this point, but I think the other part is when you take that first step, and again, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but when you take that first step, that person who's imperfect can point you in the right direction. But as you take that first step, you're now going to be closer to people who maybe can refine that information, right? Because you were the first person to go to college. Like, how did you know to get an internship, when you were a freshman? Like, I didn't know that kind of stuff when I was a freshman in college, but you obviously were now surrounding yourself with people who had a better sense of that. When you're in debate, when you're around
Yes.
different individuals, you're now getting even cleaner and more clean, direct feedback or inspiration of, hey, here's what you need to do next, right? Can you just talk about that, like maybe getting different
And yeah,
mentors or
and
getting different advice?
I'm glad you mentioned that because I realized my older brother did go to college and dropped out, and another sibling went to community college
Mhm.
and didn't finish. And I realized I said, you know what, I don't want to repeat that. So what I started to say is that how do I create these environments that are nurturing?
Mm.
So if you lack a proper mother or father figure or aunt or uncle or grandmom or teacher, you need to go and find a nurturing environment. So I became involved with my church. That was one of my nurturing environments. One of my friends, he had a two-parent household and a family that will be together and was very nurturing and loving. And I would spend time there because that helped me where I was young at 13 and felt vulnerable. I start putting myself in these situations where it was nurturing environments that helped me grow intellectually, spiritually, mentally. And so you have to be willing to realize that, look, I have to be vulnerable in order to be successful, and being vulnerable in every aspect of your life. Be willing to ask people, can you help me do this? I don't understand this. I have problems. I'm not the best. I'm insecure. It's okay to have low self-esteem at a point in your life. Then you got to start to work on it. So you acknowledge the problem or you acknowledge the deficit, and then we decide to grow from there. And so I started putting myself in nurturing environments to help me elevate and grow. I was always very inquisitive.
I love it, man. Great information. I really appreciate you talking about that nurturing environment because I think that's the key, man, is you've got to surround yourself. That's why mentorships and consulting is so important because you've got to surround yourself with people who can help nurture and foster the thing you have within you. And maybe you don't even see it yourself yet. So having those people who can help foster that is absolutely key. A great information so far. I want to transition to a round of insights. Give me a failure or an apparent failure that sets you up for later success.
I think that for me, it was in middle school because from like third grade up until seventh grade or pretty much eighth grade, I was just a goofball. I got hit by a car for being silly, not paying attention to my curfew. I was smoking cigarettes and newspapers and weed and running the streets, act like a fool and skipping school, hooky. And so those years really set me up for success. And I think that I learned during those years that I had to do better. And so that really helped me to transform because I had that perspective. All right, I'm messing up. I see siblings struggling. I got to make this do better for myself.
Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
I actually use the app Buildium, there are a lot of them out there, but I like Buildium, and that you could do your bookkeeping on there. You can keep track. You could accept payments electronically. It's a really, really great platform. That's what I use for my business.
Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
Well, a book I do like is Clockwork. And so this book, it pretty much tells you it designed your business to run itself. So what happened, a lot of us is when we start a business, we're focused on running in the business versus running the business. So I said, don't always work on it being in the business, work on the business. So sometimes you got to get off the football field. You can't always be the coach, be the trainer, and the wide receiver. You're doing everything. You got to get into the owner suite and start thinking big picture. How do I build relationships? How do I raise money? And so I like this book because it's pretty much helping you figure out how can I run the business. And then the first year you take a week away. The second year you take 2 weeks off. Next thing you take 4 weeks off. Next thing you take 4 months off. And your business can run by itself because you set it up in such a way that people know how to do stuff on their own.
Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
So what I think is that people have to take the time to sharpen their tools or their and what I mean by that is you got to take time for yourself. So every morning I make sure that I go for a walk around the park and I walk up a bunch of flights of steps, and I make sure I get opportunity just to spend time with my thoughts, to dream, to just be one with self. I think what happens is that we're so occupied with everybody else, whether that's on our phone or trying to meet somebody's need or trying to watch TV. Just take some time on your own. So I make sure that I pray in the morning and the evening. I take time to just take care of Kayr, not be so focused on external things.
Give me your number one insight for scaling a portfolio.
I think the number one thing you can do is you have to master the basics before you jump. So I think a lot of people just want to go, oh, Kayr got 150 plus rental units. I could do that overnight. No, you actually have to understand how to read a contract, how to interact with contractors, how to interact with business partners. How do I meet the deadlines for the IRS tax returns or what have you? So I would say master the basics. Once you get the basics down, then we can start adding on more and more and more.
All right, let's lighten the mood and go a different direction. So you are from Philly, Philly based primarily. I know you have a place in New York as well, but give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
So I love when I want to be disobedient. I love going to Five Guys. That's like my place where I like to eat my bad hamburgers.
Five Guys it is, man. Great place. I don't get to go there as much, but great place for sure. Listen, KR, you gave us a lot of great information. I really enjoyed hearing your story and, some of the challenges you faced with those unwanted roommates. I'm not talking about the family members. I'm talking about those rats, roaches, and mice.
Yes.
But coming out of that situation, being in a household that was crowded, and really that trigger moment, when you realize, you know what, I want something different, and being able to have the self drive, the motivation, the discipline to create that, not just as an adult, but from that moment, getting on the debate team, being a captain of athletic teams, getting a good grades, excuse me. But then getting into college, going to college, graduating, getting those internships, and being so steadfast and focused. I think my big takeaway is just the level of determination that you had to make something different for yourself, but taking all those trainings, taking all those lessons, getting surrounded by people who wanted to help you thrive, and as you said it, man, creating a nurturing environment. That is, I think, a really great insight to create success. Is you have to be in an environment that nurtures, that allows you to drive, especially when you're not. And it's so easy for people to pull you down, right? There's that crabs in the bucket mentality, and so many people who would tell, "Oh, you can't do that," or "Why would you even try that?" And I imagine you had to come in grips and face that almost daily with someone hating on you and trying to get you to stop because they didn't want to really face their own self in the mirror to realize that, man, I could have done more. Look at what KR is doing. I probably could have done more too. So I know that's a tough thing to have, but mentally it
Mhm.
just demonstrates the mental toughness you had. So I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I think it's very helpful for people. And then I also like the way you broke down kind of the differences between real estate and stocks. Again, for folks who want to check you out, they can go to kjconsulting.net, and we're going to put a link to your IG page in the show notes as well. KR, I want to thank you again for being a great guest, coming on Multifamily Insights, and we look forward to staying in touch with you.
Excellent. Thank you for having me. I had a blast.
Absolutely, man. Take care.